The morning patrol. Captain James Mac McPherson adjusted his oxygen mask as his P-51 Mustang cruised at 25,000 feet over southern Germany. The morning of August 28, 1944, had dawned clear and bright, with visibility extending for miles in every direction. Below him, the patchwork of German farmland stretched endlessly, interrupted only by the occasional town or the serpentine curves of rivers catching the morning sun. Mac had been flying combat missions over Europe for 6 months now, escorting bomber formations deep into the heart of the Third Reich. He'd seen his share of action, tangled with Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s more times than he could count. The Luftwaffe, though bloodied and increasingly outnumbered, still had teeth. But lately, the German fighters have been appearing less frequently, conserving their strength, picking their battles more carefully. His squadron, the 361st Fighter Group, had been assigned to sweep ahead of a massive bomber formation heading for targets near Augsburg. Their job was simple in concept, but deadly in execution. Clear the skies of German fighters before the heavies arrived. Mac checked his instruments again, scanning the horizon methodically. His wingman, Lieutenant Tommy Brennan, maintained perfect position off his right wing. "Red Leader, this is Red 3, crackled a voice over the radio. "I've got contrails 2 o'clock high, moving fast." Max swiveled his head, searching the indicated sector. There, thin white lines etching across the blue canvas of sky. But something was wrong. The contrails were moving far too quickly for any German fighter he knew. He'd been briefed on the latest intelligence reports about German aircraft development, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to witness. "All Red Flight, this is Red Leader. I see them. Maintain formation, prepare to engage." Mac's voice was steady, professional, but inside, a gnawing unease began to grow. Those contrails were closing the distance at an impossible rate. As the distance closed, Mac finally got his first clear look at the aircraft creating those contrails. His breath caught in his throat. The silhouette was unlike anything in his recognition charts. Sleek, triangular, with swept-back wings and no visible propeller. The aircraft seemed to slice through the air like a knife through butter. "Jesus Christ!" Brennan's voice burst over the radio, all protocol forgotten. "What the hell is that thing?" Before Mac could respond, the strange aircraft had already passed them, moving at a speed that made his Mustang feel like it was standing still. He caught a glimpse of German markings on the fuselage, the distinctive black cross of the Luftwaffe, but everything else about this machine was alien, futuristic, impossible. "Red Flight, break and pursue," Mac commanded, banking his Mustang hard to the right, pushing the throttle forward. The Packard Merlin engine roared in response, but even at full power, the gap between his fighter and the German aircraft continued to widen. It was like trying to chase a bullet with a thrown rock. The mysterious aircraft performed a casual climbing turn that would have torn the wings off any propeller-driven fighter, then disappeared into the sun's glare. Mac and his flight gave chase for several minutes, but it was futile. Whatever they had just encountered, it operated in a completely different performance envelope than anything the Allies possessed. "Red Leader to base," Mac transmitted, his mind racing to process what he'd just witnessed. "We've encountered an unknown German aircraft type. No propeller visible, extremely high speed, estimated over 500 miles per hour. Request immediate debrief upon return." The response from base was skeptical. "Red Leader, confirm your last. Did you say no propeller and 500 miles per hour?" "Affirmative, base. And I might be underestimating the speed. This thing left us standing still." As Mac reformed his flight and continued their patrol, his mind churned with implications. If the Germans had developed something this advanced, everything the Allies thought they knew about air superiority was suddenly in question. The war had just become significantly more complicated. First contact. Major Wilhelm Richter eased back on the throttles of his Messerschmitt Me 262, feeling the twin Junkers Jumo turbojet engines respond instantly. The sensation of flying the world's first operational jet fighter was unlike anything he'd experienced in 20 years of aviation. There was no vibration from pistons, No torque from a spinning propeller, just smooth, relentless thrust pushing him through the sky at speeds that still seemed impossible. He had been one of the first pilots selected for the elite Erprobungskommando 262, the test unit charged with developing tactics for this revolutionary aircraft. After months of training and experimentation, they were finally ready for limited combat operations. Today's mission was reconnaissance, but Richter had been authorized to engage enemy fighters if the opportunity presented itself, a chance to test the Me-262's combat capabilities against the best the Allies had to offer. When he'd spotted the flight of P-51 Mustangs earlier, Richter had made a high-speed pass to gauge their reaction. The American fighters had tried to pursue, but their propeller-driven aircraft might as well have been flying through molasses. The speed advantage of the Me-262 was absolute, game-changing. But speed was only part of the equation. The real question was whether this advantage could be translated into combat effectiveness. Richter checked his fuel gauges. The Me-262's engines were thirsty, and endurance was limited. He had perhaps another 20 minutes of flight time before he'd need to return to base. Through his canopy, he could see the sprawling industrial complex of Augsburg in the distance. Intelligence had warned of a large bomber raid plan for today. If the Americans came, he would be ready. His radio crackled to life. Adler 1, this is Control. Large formation of enemy bombers detected, approaching from the west. Estimated arrival over target in 15 minutes. You are authorized to engage at your discretion. Richter's pulse quickened. This would be the Me-262's first real test against American heavy bombers. He'd studied the attack profiles extensively. The key was to use the jet's speed advantage to minimize exposure to the bomber's defensive guns. Slash through the formation at high speed, fire a concentrated burst, then climb away before the gunners could track him. He pushed the throttles forward and climbed to 30,000 feet, positioning himself upsun from the approaching bomber stream. As the formation came into view, Richter was struck by its sheer size. Hundreds of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, arranged in their defensive combat boxes, their condensation trails creating an artificial cloud layer. Richter selected a B-17 on the edge of the formation, checked his four 30mm cannon were armed, and rolled into his attack dive. The Me-262 accelerated rapidly, the airspeed indicator climbing past 500 miles per hour. The bomber grew larger in his gun sight with alarming speed. At 600 meters, he opened fire. The heavy cannon shells, designed to destroy a bomber with just a few hits, found their mark. The B-17's right wing erupted in flame, and the massive aircraft began a slow, deadly spiral toward the earth below. Richter pulled up hard, the G-forces crushing him into his seat. Tracer fire from dozens of bomber gunners tried to track him, but he was already out of range, climbing away at a speed no American fighter could match. He rolled inverted at the top of his climb, looking down at the chaos below. Several P-51s had broken away from their escort positions, trying to intercept him, but they were hopelessly out of position. He had enough fuel for one more pass. This time, he approached from below, using the bomber formation's blind spot. Another B-17 fell to his cannon, its tail section completely severed by the devastating firepower. But as he pulled up from this attack, Richter noticed his port engine temperature gauge climbing into the red. The Jumo engines were temperamental, prone to failure if pushed too hard. Discretion was the better part of valor. Richter throttled back and turned for home, maintaining enough speed to stay ahead of any pursuing fighters. As he descended toward his airfield, he reflected on what had just occurred. In less than 5 minutes, he had destroyed 2 heavy bombers and evaded dozens of escorts, all without taking a single hit. The Me-262 had proven itself in combat, but Richter was also a realist. Germany had perhaps a few dozen of these jets operational, while the Allies had thousands of conventional fighters. The Me-262 was a technological marvel, but it had come too late to change the course of the war. Still, for those Allied pilots who encountered it, the German jet would be a sobering reminder that the Luftwaffe was not yet defeated. As he lowered his landing gear and prepared for approach, Richter wondered how the Allies would respond to this new threat. They would adapt, he knew they always did. But for now, for this brief moment, Germany had regained a measure of air superiority through technological innovation. It was a small victory in what was increasingly looking like a losing war. The chase. Lieutenant Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding officer of the 4th Fighter Group, stood before a room full of pilots at Debden Airfield in Essex, England. The evening briefing on August 28th had taken on an urgent tone following the day's encounters with the mysterious German jets. Maps of southern Germany covered the walls, marked with red circles indicating where the new aircraft had been sighted. "Gentlemen," Blakesley began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd been fighting the Luftwaffe since joining the RAF Eagle Squadron in 1941, "today changes everything. At least 3 of our fighter groups encountered what we now believe to be jet-propelled German fighters. I need every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Captain McPherson stood up, still wearing his flight suit from the morning mission. "Sir, the aircraft we encountered had no propeller, swept wings, and what appeared to be 2 engines mounted under the wings or in the fuselage. Speed was exceptional. I estimate at least 500 miles per hour in level flight, possibly more. It outclimbed us effortlessly." Another pilot, Captain Robert Johnson from the 56th Fighter Group, added his observation. "We saw one engage our bombers, Colonel. It made 2 passes, destroyed 2 B-17s, and was gone before we could even attempt an intercept. The speed differential made our tactical doctrine useless. By the time we reacted to its first pass, it was already setting up for the second from a completely different angle." Blakesley absorbed this information, his mind already working on countermeasures. "What about vulnerabilities? Anything you noticed?" Lieutenant Tommy Brennan raised his hand. "The one we saw seemed to be conserving fuel, sir. It made those 2 high-speed passes but didn't hang around for extended combat. Maybe their endurance is limited." "Good observation, Lieutenant," Blakesley nodded. "Intel has been expecting something like this. We've had reports of unusual aircraft at German test facilities, strange engine noises, aircraft without propellers. But this is our first confirmed combat encounter. The question now is how we respond." Major George Preddy, one of the group's top aces, spoke up. "Colonel, our standard tactics won't work against something that fast. We'll need to think differently, maybe catch them during takeoff or landing when they're most vulnerable, or set up ambushes along their likely return routes." "Exactly what I was thinking, Major," Blakesley agreed. "Starting tomorrow, I want reconnaissance flights over every airfield within range of today's encounters. These jets have to be based somewhere, and they have to land sometime. When they do, we'll be waiting." The briefing continued for another hour, with pilots contributing every detail they could remember. Sketches were drawn, speed and altitude estimates were compared, and potential tactical responses were debated. The consensus was clear. The German jets represented a serious threat, but not an insurmountable one. The Allies still had overwhelming numerical superiority, and the jets appeared to be few in number. Later that evening, Max sat in the officers' club, nursing a whiskey and replaying the encounter in his mind. The image of that sleek, impossibly fast aircraft haunted him. He'd been flying combat missions long enough to know that technological advantages could be decisive in air combat. The P-51 Mustang itself had changed the game when it arrived in theater, finally giving the Allies a fighter with the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But this was different. This wasn't an incremental improvement. It was a quantum leap. If the Germans could produce these jets in quantity, if they could train enough pilots to fly them effectively, the air war over Europe would become a bloodbath. The bomber streams that had been pounding German industry into rubble would be torn apart. Tommy Brennan joined him at the bar. "Hell of a thing, Mac. Makes you wonder what else they're cooking up in those German laboratories." Mac nodded slowly. "The question is, how many do they have? And how quickly can they build more?" "Intelligence will figure it out," Tommy said with more confidence than he felt. "They always do. In the meantime, we keep flying, keep fighting. It's all we can do." As the evening wore on and more pilots filtered into the club, the talk inevitably returned to the jets. Stories grew in the telling, speeds increased, Maneuvers became more dramatic. But beneath the bravado was an undercurrent of concern. The Luftwaffe, which many had written off as a spent force, had just demonstrated that it still had cards to play. The question was, how many, and how would they play them? Intelligence briefing. The underground briefing room at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHEF, in London was thick with cigarette smoke as intelligence officers from both American and British services gathered around a table covered with reconnaissance photographs. Wing Commander Roland Beaumont of the RAF, Colonel Richard Doyley Hughes of the USAF, and several technical intelligence specialists examined the grainy images with magnifying glasses. These were taken by photo reconnaissance Spitfires over Bavaria 3 weeks ago, Hughes explained, pointing to several images. At the time, we weren't sure what we were looking at. Now, after today's encounters, it's starting to make sense. The photographs showed an airfield with several unusual aircraft parked on the tarmac. Even from 30,000 feet, their unconventional design was apparent. No propellers, swept wings, and what appear to be pods or nacelles under the wings. Dr. Alfred Zimmermann, a German scientist who had defected to Britain in 1939, studied the images intently. Gentlemen, what you're looking at is almost certainly a turbojet-powered aircraft. The Germans have been working on this technology since the 1930s. Hans von Ohain and his team at Heinkel flew the first jet aircraft, the He-178, in 1939. We knew they were developing military applications, but we didn't expect them to reach operational status this quickly. Beaumont leaned forward. How does it work exactly? And more importantly, what are its limitations? Zimmermann pulled out a piece of paper and began sketching. A turbojet engine works on a simple principle. Air is compressed, mixed with fuel and ignited, and the expanding gases are expelled through a nozzle, creating thrust. No propeller needed. The advantage is tremendous speed. The disadvantages are high fuel consumption, long takeoff distances, and reliability issues with the turbine blades at high temperatures. Our pilots reported speeds over 500 miles per hour, Hughes interjected. That's at least 100 miles per hour faster than our best fighters. Closer to 540 miles per hour, I would estimate, Zimmermann corrected. But that speed comes at a cost. These engines likely consume fuel at 3 or 4 times the rate of a conventional engine. Combat endurance is probably limited to 30 minutes at most. And the engines are delicate. Push them too hard, and they'll fail catastrophically. Group Captain Frank Whittle, who had been developing Britain's own jet engine, had been brought in for the emergency briefing. He studied the photographs and the combat reports with professional interest. We've been working on similar technology, but we're at least a year away from operational deployment. The Germans have beaten us to it, but from what I can see, their design has significant vulnerabilities. Elaborate, please, Beaumont requested. Whittle pointed to the photographs. These engines are mounted in nacelles under the wings. That means they're vulnerable to battle damage. One hit to an engine, and the aircraft becomes virtually uncontrollable due to asymmetric thrust. Also, turbojets have poor acceleration at low speeds. Catch one of these during takeoff or landing, and it's a sitting duck. The intelligence officers began developing a profile of the new threat. Based on the limited encounters and technical analysis, they designated the aircraft as the Me-262 after intercepted German communications referenced this designation. They estimated the Germans had perhaps 24 operational, with more in production. We need to adjust our tactics immediately, Hughes stated. I'm recommending that fighter escorts maintain higher altitudes, post standing patrols over known jet bases, and focus on catching these aircraft during their vulnerable phases, takeoff, landing, and when they're low on fuel. Beaumont added, we should also accelerate our own jet programs. If the Germans can do it, we need to match them. The Meteor program needs priority resources immediately. The meeting continued late into the night, with intelligence officers cross-referencing pilot reports, analyzing reconnaissance photos, and developing countermeasures. By dawn, a comprehensive intelligence assessment had been prepared for distribution to all Allied air forces. The report concluded with a sobering assessment. The German Me-262 represents a significant technological advancement, in aerial warfare. While currently limited in numbers, if produced in quantity, it could potentially negate Allied air superiority over Europe. Immediate tactical adjustments are required, along with accelerated development of Allied jet technology. The appearance of this aircraft demonstrates that despite strategic bombing and resource constraints, German technical innovation remains a serious threat. The German perspective. General Adolf Galland stood in the concrete bunker that served as Luftwaffe headquarters outside Berlin, staring at the map of the Reich's shrinking defensive perimeter. Once Germany's youngest general and one of its most decorated fighter aces, Galland now faced the impossible task of defending German airspace against overwhelming Allied numbers. The arrival of the Me-262 in combat had given him a glimmer of hope, but also a new set of challenges. 26 operational jets, his aide, Major Steinhoff, reported. We lost one today to engine failure, but Richter successfully engaged enemy bombers. 2 confirmed kills. Galland nodded thoughtfully. He had flown the Me-262 himself and understood both its revolutionary potential and its current limitations. In Hitler's response to our request for fighter production, Steinhoff's face darkened. The Führer insists the Me-262 must be configured as a bomber. He calls it his Blitz bomber that will terrorize London. He's ordered that all production models be modified to carry bombs. Galland slammed his fist on the table, a rare display of frustration from the usually composed general. Insanity? We have the world's most advanced fighter capable of sweeping Allied bombers from our skies, and he wants to hang bombs on it? The modifications will reduce its speed, destroy its performance advantages. It's tactical madness. This fundamental disagreement about the Me-262's role had been raging for months. Galland and the fighter pilots saw it as Germany's salvation, a defensive weapon that could restore air superiority over the Reich. Hitler saw it as an offensive tool for his increasingly delusional counterattacks. The compromise had been to secretly continue fighter development while appearing to comply with Hitler's bomber directive. Professor Willy Messerschmitt himself arrived for the evening briefing, looking haggard from months of round-the-clock work. Production is ramping up, he reported. We can build 50 jets per month by October, assuming the factories aren't bombed and we have materials. But, General, I must be honest, these engines are not ready for mass production. We're pushing the metallurgy beyond its limits. The turbine blades can't withstand the temperatures for more than 25 hours of operation. 25 hours is enough for 20 combat missions, Galland countered. In this war, that's a lifetime. We need these jets operational now, not perfect later. The discussion turned to pilot training. The Me-262 required a completely different flying technique than propeller aircraft. Throttle movements had to be gradual to avoid flameouts. Landing speeds were much higher. The lack of propeller torque meant different handling characteristics. Already, they had lost 3 jets and 2 pilots to training accidents. Major Johannes Steinhoff, himself a veteran ace selected for jet training, presented his assessment. We need at least 6 weeks to properly train a pilot on the 262, assuming he's already an experienced fighter pilot. But we don't have 6 weeks. The Americans and British are advancing on all fronts. Paris has fallen. The Soviets are in Poland. Time is our enemy as much as the Allies. Galland made a decision. We form an elite unit, Jagdverband 44. Only our best pilots, those who can adapt quickly. We'll concentrate our jets instead of spreading them piecemeal across different units. Mass them for maximum psychological and tactical impact. Make the Allies think we have more than we do. The meeting was interrupted by an air raid alarm. As the bunker's concrete walls vibrated from distant explosions, another RAF night raid on Berlin. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They were discussing the world's most advanced fighter while hiding underground from conventional bombers. Later, standing outside watching the searchlights probe the night sky and the flak burst bloom like deadly flowers, Galland confided to Steinhoff, "We're 18 months too late. If we'd had 300 Me-262s operational a year ago, we could have stopped the bomber offensive. Now, we're just delaying the inevitable." Steinhoff, ever the optimist, replied, but we're forcing them to adapt, to spend resources countering our jets. Every day we fight gives our scientists time to develop even more advanced weapons. The war isn't over yet, her general. Galland appreciated his subordinates' loyalty, but knew better. The Me-262 was indeed a wonder weapon, but Germany needed miracles, not wonders. Still, he would fight on, using every jet, every pilot, every advantage to make the Allies pay dearly for every mile of German sky. Technical realization. Dr. Robert Goddard, the American rocket scientist, sat in the Technical Evaluation Center at Wright Field in Ohio, studying the reports from Europe with growing fascination and concern. Alongside him, Dr. Theodor von Kármán, the Hungarian-American mathematician and aerospace engineer, performed rapid calculations on a slide rule. They had been called in urgently after the first combat reports of the German jets reached the United States. The Germans have leapfrogged us by at least 3 years, von Kármán stated matter-of-factly. While we've been perfecting propeller-driven fighters, they've entered the jet age. Look at these performance figures. 540 miles per hour in level flight, 40,000-foot service ceiling, rate of climb that exceeds anything we have. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, had flown in specifically for this meeting. Gentlemen, I need to know 3 things. How do they do it? Can we counter it? And how quickly can we develop our own? Goddard spread out technical drawings on the table. The Germans have been working on turbojet technology since 1936. We've actually had intelligence on this for years, but didn't fully appreciate its potential. Their approach uses axial flow compressors, which are more efficient than the centrifugal designs we and the British have been pursuing. It's brilliant engineering. Von Kármán added, the swept-wing design is particularly clever. It delays the onset of compressibility effects at high speed. We're only now beginning to understand this phenomenon. The Germans clearly discovered it through wind tunnel testing or possibly by accident. The room filled with other specialists, metallurgists, aerodynamicists, propulsion engineers, each contributing their expertise to understanding the German achievement. What emerged was a picture of remarkable innovation under pressure. Despite Allied bombing, material shortages, and political interference, German scientists and engineers had created a revolutionary weapons system. Colonel Donald Putt, chief of the Technical Data Laboratory, presented findings from captured German documents. They're using special nickel alloys for the turbine blades to withstand the extreme temperatures. But here's the interesting part. They don't have enough nickel. They're substituting with inferior materials, which is why the engines have such short operational lives. It's a calculated compromise. Can we exploit that weakness? Arnold asked. Possibly, Putt replied. If we can further disrupt their supply of strategic materials, particularly nickel and chromium, their jet production will suffer. But, General, we should also be accelerating our own jet program. The Bell P-59 Aerocomet is flying, but it's inferior to the German design. We need to skip a generation and go straight to more advanced designs. The discussion shifted to American jet development. Lockheed's secret XP-80 project, using a British engine, showed promise. General Electric was working on improved engines based on British designs. But everyone in the room understood they were playing catch-up. Dr. von Kármán presented a sobering analysis. The appearance of the Me-262 represents more than just a new aircraft. It's a paradigm shift in aerial warfare. Speed has always been important, but now it's decisive. Our entire doctrine of air combat, based on maneuvering dogfights, becomes obsolete when one aircraft is 150 miles per hour faster than another. The faster aircraft dictates the terms of engagement. A young engineer, Robert Gilruth, who would later play a crucial role in the space program, raised his hand. What about guided missiles? If we can't match their speed with manned aircraft, perhaps we could with unmanned weapons. The room fell silent. It was a radical idea, but one worth considering. The Germans were known to be working on rocket weapons as well. The V-1 flying bomb was already terrorizing London. What else did they have in development? Arnold stood up, his decision made. Gentlemen, effective immediately, jet aircraft development is our highest priority. I want every resource, every brilliant mind, every test facility focused on this. We're also going to establish a technical intelligence unit specifically to capture German jet technology as our forces advance. We may be behind, but we're not out of this race. As the meeting concluded, von Karman pulled Goddard aside. Robert, we're witnessing the birth of a new age. These jets are just the beginning. In 10 years, perhaps less, aircraft will fly faster than sound. In 20 years, maybe we'll have rockets capable of reaching space. The Germans have opened a door that can't be closed. Goddard nodded thoughtfully. Then we'd better make sure we're the ones who walk through it first. Strategic implications. Prime Minister Winston Churchill stood at the map table in the Cabinet War Rooms beneath Whitehall, his ever-present cigar, smoke curling up toward the reinforced concrete ceiling. The emergency meeting of the Defense Committee had been called following the reports of German jet fighters in combat. Around the table sat the chiefs of staff, scientific advisors, and key ministers. Gentlemen, Churchill began, his gravelly voice filling the underground chamber. We have underestimated German ingenuity. These jet aircraft represent not just a tactical challenge, but a strategic one. If they can produce them in numbers, our bomber offensive, the very foundation of our strategy to defeat Germany, is in jeopardy. Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal, Chief of the Air Staff, presented his assessment. Prime Minister, our intelligence suggests the Germans have fewer than 50 operational jets. While concerning, this is not yet a decisive threat. However, if they can increase production to several hundred per month, our daylight bombing campaign will become unsustainable. Lord Charwell, Churchill's scientific advisor, interjected with his analysis. The German production is constrained by several factors: special alloys, skilled workers, and manufacturing facilities. Our strategic bombing should immediately prioritize these bottlenecks. Every jet factory destroyed, every shipment of chromium intercepted, delays their program by weeks or months. Churchill turned to Sir Henry Tizard, the aeronautical engineer who had championed radar development. In our own jet program, the Gloucester Meteor will enter service within weeks, Tizard replied. But I must be frank, it's inferior to the German Me-262 in speed and altitude performance. We're at least a year behind in engine development, perhaps two in aerodynamics. The discussion revealed a harsh truth. Despite Britain's scientific prowess and industrial might, Germany had achieved a significant technological breakthrough. The reasons were complex: different research priorities, the pressure of defending against strategic bombing, and perhaps a greater willingness to take risks with improving technology. General Sir Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, raised a crucial point. We must consider that if Germany has achieved this breakthrough in aviation, what other secret weapons might they be developing? We know about their V-weapons program. What else might be coming? This question hung heavy in the air. Intelligence reports had hinted at German research into atomic physics, advanced submarines, and even more exotic weapons. The jet fighter might be just the tip of the iceberg. Churchill, ever the strategist, saw both danger and opportunity. We must respond on multiple fronts. First, tactical adjustments to protect our bomber forces. Second, accelerate our own advanced weapons programs. Third, and most importantly, we must capture German technology and scientists as our armies advance. This knowledge must not fall into the wrong hands, particularly Soviet hands. The last point reflected growing tensions within the Allied coalition. As the war neared its end, competition for German technology and expertise was intensifying. The Soviets, Americans, and British all had teams ready to seize German research facilities and personnel. Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, First Sea Lord, added another dimension to the discussion. If the Germans can build jet aircraft, they might also develop jet-powered missiles. Imagine V-2 rockets with greater accuracy and range, or anti-ship missiles that could threaten our naval supremacy. We must think beyond the current threat. The meeting continued for hours, with decisions made that would shape not just the remainder of the war, but the post-war world. Resources were reallocated to jet research. Special commando units were tasked with capturing German technical facilities. Intelligence priorities were reshuffled to focus on advanced weapons programs. As the meeting concluded, Churchill remained behind with Portal. "Charles, this German jet has given me much to ponder. We're winning the war through mass production and attrition. But wars of the future might be won by technological superiority. We must ensure Britain remains at the forefront of such development." Portal nodded. "The age of the propeller is ending, Prime Minister. The jet age is beginning. And beyond that, who knows? Rockets to the moon, perhaps." Churchill smiled grimly. "First, let's focus on rockets to Berlin." "But yes, Charles, the world is changing faster than we imagined. This war has accelerated technological development by decades. We must be ready for whatever comes next." The war continues. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in August when Allied pilots first encountered the Me-262. Captain Mac McPherson, now Major McPherson, stood on the captured airfield at Lechfeld in southern Germany, staring at the burned-out remains of several Me-262s destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. It was April 1945, and the Third Reich was in its death throes. The jets had indeed proven to be formidable opponents in the months following their combat debut. German pilots, flying in increasingly desperate circumstances, had used them to savage bomber formations, shooting down dozens of B-17s and B-24s. But it hadn't been enough. The Allies had adapted, adjusted their tactics, and most importantly, maintained overwhelming numerical superiority. Mac walked among the wreckage with Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, who had succeeded in shooting down one of the jets in air combat, a feat that required equal parts skill, luck, and the German pilot making a critical error. "Look at this," Meyer said, pointing to the sophisticated swept-wing design. "Even destroyed, you can see how advanced it is. We were fighting the future with the present." A team of American technical intelligence officers was already at work cataloging parts, taking photographs, and preparing to ship everything back to the United States for analysis. Similar scenes were playing out across Germany as Allied forces overran jet production facilities and airfields. The race to capture German technology and expertise was in full swing. Wilhelm Richter, the German pilot who had scored the Me-262's first victories, had survived the war, though barely. His last combat mission had ended with both engines flaming out due to fuel starvation, the result of Germany's collapsed logistics network. He'd glided his jet to a crash landing and spent the last weeks of the war hiding from both advancing Allies and SS units, hunting for deserters. Now, in American captivity, he was being debriefed by intelligence officers eager to learn everything about the Me-262's capabilities and limitations. "You want to know the truth?" Richter told them. "The jet was magnificent, but it came too late and in too few numbers. We had the better machine, but you had better everything else. More fuel, more pilots, more bases, more time." The statistics bore out his assessment. Of the 1,400 Me-262s produced, fewer than 300 had seen combat. They had claimed over 500 Allied aircraft destroyed, an impressive kill ratio, but insignificant against the thousands of Allied aircraft operating daily over Germany. Mechanical failures, fuel shortages, and Allied attacks on jet bases had kept most of them grounded. General Adolf Galland, captured in the war's final days, provided perhaps the most insightful analysis during his interrogation. The Me-262 represented what Germany could have been: technologically superior, innovative, ahead of our time. But like many German wonder weapons, it was too little, too late. We needed 1,000 jets in 1943, not 100 in 1944. The lessons learned from a Me-262 would reshape military aviation in the post-war world. Both the United States and Soviet Union recruited German jet engineers and scientists, beginning a technological competition that would define the Cold War. The swept-wing design would become standard on all high-speed aircraft. The turbojet engine would evolve into increasingly powerful and efficient designs. Mack received orders to escort a special prisoner, Dr. Willy Messerschmitt himself, to Paris for further interrogation. As they flew in a C-47 transport, Mack couldn't help but reflect on the irony. The man who had designed the aircraft that had terrified Allied pilots was now a defeated prisoner, his country in ruins, his revolutionary jets scattered across captured airfields. "Tell me," her doctor, Mack asked through an interpreter, "when you designed the Tu-62, did you think it would win the war?" Messerschmitt was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I am an engineer, Major. I design aircraft to fly faster, higher, farther. Whether they win or lose wars is for others to determine. But I knew that we were creating something that would change aviation forever. In that sense, perhaps we did win something. We showed the world what was possible." As the transport descended toward Paris, Mack looked out at the scarred landscape below, cities in ruins, countryside pockmarked with bomb craters. The war in Europe would be over in weeks, but the technological revolution it had spawned would continue. The jet age had arrived, born in the desperate skies over Germany, and nothing would ever be the same. The Mi-262 had been Nazi Germany's last grasp at air superiority, a brilliant but futile attempt to turn back the Allied tide through technological innovation. It had failed in its immediate goal, but succeeded in demonstrating that the future of aviation lay not with propellers and pistons, but with jets and turbines. August 28, 1944, the day Allied pilots first encountered the Mi-262, marked not just a moment of shock and awe in World War II, but the dawn of a new era in human flight. In the years to come, as jets became commonplace and eventually broke the sound barrier, those who had been there on that August day would remember the moment when the impossible became reality, when the future arrived ahead of schedule, and when a desperate nation's technological achievement briefly challenged the course of history itself.